Hi, everybody. So, we're going to be looking at chapter 20 here, who's government. So, this is really about government. So, the focus of this chapter is really on what we think of as progressivism, which is progressive politics. We're going to be looking at this progressive era. That's one of the names it goes by. It goes by the Gilded Age, it goes by the Progressive, Victorian era. It's all the same, about 40-year period. So in this period, we have unions, farmers, middle class Americans really looking to make very sweeping changes to our socio-political landscape. Um, Very often, reform efforts attempting to help the poor, help immigrants, equal rights, women's rights. Very tumultuous time in politics when you consider American imperialism during this period, the wars we were involved in, World War One. Um, so between all the immigration, the conflicts, American imperialism and expansion, you put it all together, and it makes it one of the most interesting periods in American history to really study. Is this time period? All right, the political earthquakes of the 1890s. So depression hit America around 1893, lasted to about 1900. In March of 93, we see the stock market crash. We see farm foreclosures, railroad bankruptcies, hundreds and hundreds of businesses closing, foreclosures. People panicked with the stock market going down, markets crashed, people emptied out their bank accounts. By July, hundreds of banks across America were declaring insolvency. They simply didn't have money. They couldn't give people their deposits. They were closing the doors. Um, Officially, the stock market, it really starts in March. Officially, the market crashes in May. By July, we're in a full-fledged depression. It happens really fast. Um, People couldn't pay their debtors, or they couldn't pay their creditors. They couldn't pay their loans. Biggest investment was really England investing in us. And I take that. I think really our biggest investment was really Europe, European investments into America. And they stopped doing that. European investments, millions of dollars, started to dry up. They couldn't guarantee they were going to get there. I mean, the reason you make investments, of course, is for interest, is for return on investment. Um, so they couldn't get that. By the summer, by July, unemployment is 20%. Um, Homelessness, social unrest, millions of people poor, starving, out of jobs, and many people in the middle class and above. And again, the way depression works, the rich people are fine. They might lose a bunch of money, but they're still rich. Middle class people, most of them do okay. Middle class is hurt, but most survive. The biggest challenge during depression is always on the poor. 80% of all of the problems, issues, unemployment, restlessness, uh, all the issues with homelessness, it goes to the working class, the working and the poor, which was a large portion of America during this second industrial revolution. And many people in the middle and upper classes fear that the majority, which is the poor working class, are going to rise up and like take over the government or something. This was actually a popular thing back in the mid late 1800s. This idea of the the common people, the commoners rising up, the proletariat overthrowing the bourgeoisie, if you want to use some that kind of language. And many people fear this, many of the uneducated. Well, Jacob Coxey sort of exacerbates it. He was a radical from Ohio. He proposed that the government should hire all the unemployed people to fix the roads and bridges. Novel idea. If you know anything about the next Great Depression, that's exactly what they do. In this point in time, though, no one would even think about doing something like that. The government employing all kinds of people to do construction, that would be unheard of. That would nothing like that had ever occurred. He did leave a peaceful march on Washington around 94. His group, they called themselves Coxey's Army. No weapons, they weren't carrying weapons, but they were wearing uniforms. because many of them were Civil War veterans. Again, Civil War just ended 30 years before this. You have a lot of Civil War vets, and so they sort of call them an army, a radical labor army, something like this. They were just looking for jobs. They were looking for the government to help them, and they thought the government should help. Many people viewed him as extremists. Hell, some people even called them terrorists. They didn't do anything. They never even did anything other than march to Washington. Then they camped outside the Capitol. The Capitol Police, the military sent in. They're arrested. They're thrown in jail. Their camp is burned down. It's terrible, terrible kind of stuff. Uh, where did the blame go for the Depression? Really, the blame for all of this was on the Democrats and Grover Cleveland. That's Grover Cleveland down there at the bottom corner. That's where the blame went. The Democrats were in party. Cleveland was the president in this time period. So there you go. Always the way it is. Whatever party's in charge, it doesn't make a difference. Whoever's in charge when we hit a depression or a big financial crisis, that party's always blamed. So he was blamed for it. Um, he didn't do anything to cause it. He didn't really do anything to fix it either. But to be fair, almost no one would have. In this point in time, the idea of the government stepping in to help you or me that are out of work or at homeless would have been unheard of. If you're out of work, it's your problem. It's your fault. If you're homeless, well, fix it. You need to fix it, not the government. Wasn't the government's role to step in and deal with your personal daily problems. That does change soon. This is Coxey here on his horse marching to Washington. Has some people following. Got some people in suits there. Um, Maybe reporters. Who knows? They're marching for Washington, hoping government's going to give them jobs, help them out, give them assistance. They really see themselves as Americans. I mean, they're carrying the big American flag there. They're dressed respectfully. They marched peacefully. They didn't go yelling, screaming. They didn't carry any weapons. The idea that they were being labeled as extremists and radicals really is only because of the atmosphere of this time period when there's this real fear of a popular uprising of the poor, overthrowing the upper classes. Today that might seem silly, stupid. Back then they believed it. This was happening in Europe. I mean, these things, these revolutions, these socialist revolutions were occurring in European society, in Asia. So this wasn't a fantasy. This wasn't some imaginary thing. This was really occurring in other places of the world, South America. So, yeah. Uh, Looking back on it now, we were never anywhere near that in America, never even close. But you can see it much clearer afterwards. When it's all going on, frankly, people are scared shitless. So, it was pretty crazy there for a while. Here shows Coxey was just one. Look at all these others. Kelly, Fry, Sanders, Shefflin, Hogan, Cantwell, Jeffrey. Some is marching as far away from the West Coast, San Francisco, Los Angeles, Washington, Oregon, marching across the entire country. They would go and they would have rallies in big cities. They would have marches, rallies, protests in the streets. Had Coxey been the only one? Okay, maybe. But I mean, look at all these. And this is just in 94. This is in 1 year. Tens of thousands of people marching on Washington across the whole country, trying to rally support and get people's attention. And they're marching through all these towns and cities which are hit by the Depression, trying to find supporters, gather more people. This was huge. This was probably the only thing in 1894 that could have overshadowed the Depression itself was this, and it got people's attention. They really did. So now we're going to talk about Democrats in the solid South. So the Democrats and the People's Party in the South, 1890s. So the Democratic Party continued to gain strength and power in the South in the 1890s. Continued to really become dominant in the southern states. 1870s, we had the Republican Party in power in the South due to Reconstruction. That doesn't mean they were the popular party, but the Republicans were generally in charge because they were the party of Lincoln. They were the party that was behind freeing the slaves, and so they were sort of running the show. Well, the Democrats really gained power and authority in the 80s and 90s. They had most of the white votes. I mean, most white people voted for the Democratic Party, believing they represented their interest. And they bought the black votes. They bought them, they coerced them, they forced them to vote, or if they couldn't vote, then they disenfranchised them, made it where they couldn't vote. If they couldn't get the blacks to vote for the Democrats, then they would disenfranchise, meaning take away their ability to vote. Through poll taxes, you have to pay a tax. Most poor people who are having a problem feeding their families, do they have extra money to spend just to go vote for a political party that many people think doesn't even represent them, Democratic Party? So, about violence. If you're a black man or woman and you walk up to the polls, there's a bunch of white guys standing outside threatening with baseball bats and guns. You just don't need that. You just don't need it. So you're gonna turn and walk away. I mean, it's just trouble you don't need. Um, Literacy tests. Some states had requirements where you had to interpret a section of the Constitution before you could even vote. I mean, ridiculous. It's crazy. Uh, and yet it was actually pretty common practice in the southern states. All ways to disenfranchise blacks, which were largely uneducated or poorly educated, and also disenfranchise poor whites. Majority of people who voted in the southern states in this time period are middle class and upper class whites. That's it. Some states would have voter turnouts of 20%. That's it. The other 80% of the people were disenfranchised, unable to vote, discouraged from voting. Yeah. Um, well, in the 1890s, a new political party arises. We call the People's Party. Sometimes they're simply called populists. Populist is a general term, but the name of the party was the People's Party. The People's Party arises. Many people see it as an alternative Democratic Party. The Democratic Party obviously has no interest in poor, white, or black, especially people of color. And so many of these people who are poor, they see this party as sort of representing them. They want everybody to vote. They don't have all these poll taxes, literacy tests. I mean, don't get me wrong, the polling places are generally run by the counties and states, but the populists try to resist against that, try to challenge it in court. The populists try to get these disenfranchisements taken off the books. Very limited success. They really want to bring poor whites and blacks together, which, by the way, poor whites and blacks make up 80% of the South. So if you actually got all the poor whites and blacks together on the same page, working together to a common cause, they would run the South. Just simply, they would run it. They would control the politics. Doesn't happen though. They're obviously the majority, poor farmers, poor wage earners. All through the 90s, it really increases in strength because it becomes more and more obvious that the Democratic Party doesn't have the interest of common poor workers or people of color of interest. And you have some southern states like Mississippi, 50% black. And the Democratic Party has no interest in black people even voting. So, in response to the growing power of the populace, the Democrats go ahead and make this disenfranchisement stuff official. They go full steam ahead. They start creating laws, policies, local laws, state laws. Um, they start creating all these laws. We're going to call them black codes, all these different laws to make it where not only is it difficult to vote, it's basically impossible to vote if you're a person of color or in many ways even poor at all. They claim that the People's Party were advocating for Negro rule because they were allowing black people to vote, black people to run for office. Um, if you understand the history of racism in the South, once you start going around talking about Negro rule and black people running everything, many poor whites would shy away from that. They have no interest in that. The racism is simply part of the culture in the South. So they use fraud to try and basically try to grow black-white distrust. Fraud, lying, false advertising, false stories, ballot box stuffing, buying votes, violence, all these laws, these black codes all across the South to restrict the vote. How bad was it? By 1908, all southern states from Texas all the way, basically that whole curve from Texas all the way up to Virginia, had laws on the books with literacy tests, laws on the books of the grandfather clause that you can't vote unless your grandfather votes. Of course, most people's grandfathers were slaves and couldn't vote, therefore, oh, you can't vote either. I mean, it's ridiculous stuff. Um, got so bad that by 1910 or so, only about 20% of black people ever voted. only 45% of poor whites voted. And your elections were entirely just run by middle and upper class whites. They had all the power, all the authority. Disenfranchisement was very effective among the poor, the minorities. Segregation follows suit. White supremacy rules and dominates the South. For how long? Pretty much the next 60 years. All the way to the 1960s, we see white supremacy, white power, total control of white politics in everything from schools, public institutions, segregation, discrimination in parks, drinking fountains, railroads, everything. Anything and everything that you could think of would be discriminated or segregated against in all ways to keep black people from having any power at all, any economic or political authority. So, what the populists did, there's really two things what they did. One, they actually forced the Democratic Party to step up and to increase their efforts of disenfranchisement, of which the party did an excellent job of. And by 1910, it was successful. They pretty much eliminated any type of resistance. People's Party disappears. Voter turnout declines across the southern states. Yeah, it's the idea in America is everyone should be able to vote. Well, that was not the case here. The case was no, you don't get to vote unless we think you're going to vote for the Democrats. It was very bad. It was very racist. It was very prejudiced. It was discriminatory. It was all the bad stuff. It really was. It's terrible. And this pretty much is the way it is for the next 50, 60 years. And the second result of the Populist Party we'll get to in a minute. We'll get to that in a minute. It shows disenfranchisement by state. So constitutional amendments in these pink areas. They actually changed their constitutions to keep poors and blacks from voting. Feels like we're going back 100 years. It's what's crazy is in modern times today, there's some of these southern states changing stuff, trying to disenfranchise poor immigrants, trying to disenfranchise Latinos, trying to disenfranchise people. It's happening today, 100 years after this. I don't know. Does that mean it's never going to end? Of course, today it's a Republican Party doing it. The parties have entirely switched, but we'll talk about that as we go through it. Segregation policy, I covered that already. State constitutional amendments, the pink. By poll taxes, other devices is the darker pink. The darker pink is by poll taxes and other devices. And then you look at all these brown areas are areas that have over 50% of the population that's black. Those are also all the areas where they created a constitutional amendment to disenfranchise blacks, every one of them. Where most black people live, they actually wrote in their constitution ways to keep blacks from voting. They did it to where it didn't violate the 14th and 15th Amendments. It was tricky wording. It's basically, loopholes, finding ways to disenfranchise without technically violating other constitutional amendments. Remember, these are state constitutions, not federal constitution. Well, the Supreme Court comes in and does the same thing. Supreme Court decision, which is one of the most infamous decisions of the Supreme Court, incredibly racist, prejudicial, oppressive. Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896. It addresses a challenge to these black code laws, or sometimes referred to as Jim Crow laws, referring to this character, this Jim Crow character, which was a parody making fun of black people that you would see in like vaudeville, where white people would have blackface. Then to make fun and to put down blacks and show that blacks were silly or stupid or inferior, or unintelligent, or just dumb. The idea was they would have, again, the white people in blackface to make it seem like black people were just stupid and silly. So this idea of segregation and racism against blacks was often identified as Jim Crow segregation, Jim Crow racism, because it all tied together. It was always to insult and belittle black people and to take away any power they had, and to oppress them. So these challenges, the court rules that separate accommodations are fine. This is the very famous separate but equal ruling. Accommodations and services are all fine. You can choose to have a black or white establishment. This again is standard on the books for the next 60 years. None of this really changes till the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s. So when that laundry sign up there in the corner puts up that sign, we wash for white people only, that's it. It's done. It's legal now. If you don't want to, you don't ever have to serve or do any business with a black person. You can simply choose. You can say, well, this establishment is for whites only. If you're aware that today in America, there's lots of places that require memberships, yacht clubs, country clubs, golf courses. They didn't used to be that way. You know, it all started in this time period. All those institutions that now require memberships, and many of them still have them. You know, you still have to be a member of the country club, a member of the yacht club, a member of this or that. All these different fraternal organizations in America that began, that you have to have a membership and you have to apply to. All that began in this time period because they now knew they could simply create rules, and all the rules said. And I've seen documentation of like the is it the Elks Club? I saw an application from the Elks Club from 1977. So even in 77, what, 80 years after this, and it said we don't accept people of color, we don't accept African, or we don't accept, what was the term they used? I guess it was Negro or colored people. Also said they didn't accept non-Christians. Uh, you had to apply for membership. That's what they did. They did this on purpose. All those things so that they could exclude all the people of color and say, well, we're whites only. Membership to whites only. Member to upper class only. Member to Christians only. Uh, this became very common. But this idea that America is supposed to have all this tolerance and religious freedom and everyone, even though that might be part of our Constitution, all through our history, people in power have tried to change that and tried to keep that from actually being a real case. The thing about this is it actually followed the law technically. I think they actually used the 14th Amendment. 14th Amendment, which guaranteed some type of equality for all people of color. And they used in the amendment, they said, yeah, everyone's equal. Everyone's equal, but your door of equality is over there and my door is over here. Ideally, they're all supposed to be equal, but we know they weren't. The cartoon there is a bit of an exaggeration, but not far off. It shows the Whitewater fountain is a fancy marble fountain with beautiful clear crystal water, and the Blackwater fountain is a horse water pump for like giving water for horses. Um, Separate but not equal, and it wasn't. Separate but equal was entirely discriminatory and racist. And it stays on the books for, well, 1950s, 1960s. Talk about Teddy Roosevelt next. It's Teddy Roosevelt in the White House. So McKinley was elected president in 96. He has 4 years. He's then re-elected president in 1900, and he's promptly assassinated just about a month after he starts his second term. Well, Teddy Roosevelt was going to run for president, and many people were scared of him. They were scared of what he represented because he was he had some very radical ideas, and they were scared of it. So what they did was they pushed him to the VP position, which is, for most of our history, the VP has been considered to be about the most powerless position in Washington. You really had no authority as VP. Your job was literally just to sit there and wait, and if the president died, that's really what you were there for. And boom, suddenly Roosevelt's president. He was Republican. The guy the Republicans did not want as president is now president, with McKinley being killed. So that changed some things. It really did. And we're really lucky because McKinley was a poor, terrible president, honestly. He was a liar. He was a cheat. We'll talk about that with the War of 1898, how McKinley handled it. He was bad. A corrupt and power-hungry president. So he's gone. Teddy's in charge. Teddy was very experienced. He had served all across the country from coast to coast. He had been in the military. He was an army officer during that War of 1898. It's one of the things that probably helped propel him into politics. Um, Overall, great reputation. People who were not in the party People who were not really deeply in the Republican Party, really worried about the future of the Republican Party, loved him. People who really knew what Teddy's ideology was like, who knew him closely, though, pretty much loved or hated him. Either you liked him really because he had very radical, very interesting ideas that were much different, or you hated him because he was very threatening in his sort of progressive political ideology. He is what we consider our first progressive president in our history. Um, so many people in the know in the Republican Party didn't want him elected. Well, they didn't get, he wasn't elected, but then he became. He scared the Republican Party. His popularity was actually a problem. They feared populism. The same way we just talked how populism, the Populist Party, the People's Party really threatened the Democratic Party, and the Democratic Party shut him down. The Democratic Party destroyed the Populist Party in the South. Well, here's the deal. In the rest of the country, the Populist Party also is shut down, but the difference is the Democrats shut down the Populist Party and actually become much more hardline and completely get rid of them. The Republicans would have done the same exact thing because they had no interest in People's Party progressivism, poor common people basically rising up and controlling politics. No, the Republicans were elitist as well. They were just more focused on Northern industrialism, really, as the Southern Democrats were more focused on Southern agricultural agrarianism. But both were elitist. Both parties were really just focused on the upper classes, really. Um, had the Republican Party stayed with McKinley, they would have shut down the People's Party, probably very much like the Democrats did. Thing is, when Teddy came in, Teddy had a lot of very progressive populist ideas, and he actually, and this is that the second effect of the Populist Party, Teddy actually absorbs a lot of their ideas and actually starts enacting many populist ideas, which is popular. That was probably what scared the Democrats and Republicans so much. So many people really liked the populist ideas that what the two main political parties wanted to do was keep them repressed and oppressed so that the ideas didn't really get widely disseminated and give people an opportunity to actually vote on them. And they do with Teddy. And we see our politics change in America. We see the political system in America make some sweeping changes. No one was really prepared when he took office. Very contradictory. He was well aligned with business interests as a standard Republican. So in that way, he was well aligned with big business interests, corporate interests. But here's where he detoured. He also took a keen interest in working labor interests. He really believed the workers were the ones that ran America. They're the ones that ran all the. By ran, I guess that's the wrong way to put it. They were the blood of all the factories. They're the ones that were actually did all the work. And he understood that and actually respected that. The coal miner strike in 1902, he actually went out and walked among the coal miners and talked to the coal miners and tried to help them get concessions. And he completely took the side of the coal miners in a coal miner strike. Um, Very interesting. That is something no other president had ever done or might ever thought about doing. He, in addition to having an interest in worker and actually have an interest in labor issues, which other presidents had not. Labor was really focused on not in business interests, really more focused on the workers. He also was our first conservationist president. He reserved a ton of lands for national parks, national forests. We're going to talk a little more about that. But he also held over lands for logging and irrigation projects. So he did both. Through his entire presidency, in essence, he walked the line. More towards more elitist. He wasn't elitist. He was from a rich and wealthy family. More elitist policies, big business interests. But he also were more labor interests and worker interests. Interesting kind of guy. He sold lands for farming, irrigation projects, which serve two purposes. One, it serves business interests, but it also puts a bunch of people to work. He put thousands of people to work building dams, bridges, canals, irrigation projects, clearing forests, and then simultaneously would set other forests and waterways aside for conservation and preservation. Very interesting kind of guy. Certainly controversial stuff, very much controversial stuff. It's really weird. So he puts money in the pockets of big business, but at the same time, he puts people to work like Coxey's Army, like Wanted, doing these projects that are government sponsored or government arranged projects. Yeah, generally very well liked. He also did other things. And some of these things are really significant, and I put this under legacy because they occur. Much of this he gets started during his presidency, but many of the results occur after he leaves office, actually. That really shows your legacy, doesn't it? Because future presidents can come along and change things, right? Change the laws. You create a government office, they can abolish a government office. Many of the things he created continue to stay and prosper after his presidency, which really shows how significant they were and how impactful they were. He created the BOC, Bureau of Corporations, to investigate unfair business practices against workers. This is some antitrust stuff. He signs into law the Sherman antitrust laws, which specifically break up monopolies. For instance, Standard Oil, Rockefeller, at one point the richest man and the most powerful, richest company in America. Total monopoly over the oil industry. The Sherman antitrust actually breaks it up and tears it apart into a bunch of oil companies, breaking up a monopoly, which is unfair to consumers, unfair to the market. Monopolies are not fair to business in general. Unfair business competition. That happens after he leaves office, but it happens as a result of the antitrust legislation. Yeah, much of this was unpopular with big business. Well, 1904, he ran for president again, or the first time, depending on how you look at it. He was seen as a friend of the working class, and he has a very strong win. So even though the rich people, the powerful people didn't like him, didn't like what he represented, didn't like that they were taking money out of their pockets and putting money in the workers' pockets, the voters liked him, and he wins a strong win in 1904, and they elect him for his second term in office. He runs on the square deal. Why square deal? What's special about a square? What's special about a square? What defines a square? The simple mathematical defining of a square is four equal sides. I'm a mathematician. That's just what I see it as. Four equal sides. The four angles are all equal. The four sides. So that's the idea of a square. Everything's equal. He's going to equalize the playing field. Did he completely? Of course not. It's impossible. But did he actually shrink it? Yeah, he did. He actually reduced the rich poor gap during his time in office as president. Yeah. Many people, the working class, really saw him as their friend, their helper, someone who's going to take care of them. And he did that. He also was seen, I'm not going to say a friend to African Americans, but he was seen as somewhat friendly towards them. He invites Booker T. Washington, which I mentioned before, one of the most prominent civil rights advocates of the time for racial uplift, black uplift. He invites him, he has dinner with him at the White House. Yeah. First president to bring a black man into the White House and sit down at an official dinner, equal with the president. Yeah. He got death threats for that. He got death threats for doing that. So at the end of the day, he was an elite rural president. He was a rich man, so elitist. However, he did practice social activism. He practiced conservation. He was the first progressive president that really focused on the working class, really focused on working class interests. And even though he did put some interest into big business, he spent just as much time focusing on the workers. Um, yeah, yeah. He did practice this idea of condescension, which was a sort of a social practice of the rich, how you would treat those below you respectfully, with the understanding that they were lessers. And in a way, that was what made Roosevelt this progressive president. He believed the lessers needed help. He believed they were disadvantaged. They needed assistance. So some of this was an altruism. Some of this was, some of this is sort of looking down his nose at people. And it's a little patronizing. However, when it was all said and done, he actually helped a lot of people, helped a lot of workers, a lot of poor workers get better jobs, have better working conditions, have better quality of life for many people. Yeah, um, it's really weird. These people wouldn't have seen the irony either. The rich and wealthy looking down at the poor and sort of pitying them. I don't know if they would have really seen the irony of that. This whole idea. Um, I don't know. I don't know, but nonetheless, it's what it was. He also does something else here, which is very interesting. He's our first president to really campaign across the country. In the 1904 election, he campaigns coast to coast. He goes on the back of a train, going across America, campaigning, having these speeches, these stump speeches, we call them, where you're out on the stump. And look at the crowds: black, white, male, female. So mixed race and mixed gender crowds. Hell, in some places in America, that wasn't even legal. Alabama, Mississippi. There were laws in places down there that said blacks and whites couldn't even gather publicly together. Um, you know, so it really shows how he changed the way politics worked in this period, where he's really focusing on much more face-to-face interactions, much more worried about the common people and their problems for whatever the reasons are. And that leads us into the next topic, which is this idea of progressivism or grassroots progressivism, which is in essence politics at the bottom, the idea of the roots. There it grows up into the upper echelon. So some grassroots progressive movements here. So women often use the idea of maternalism, which this was the woman's role in society. This idea of a woman caring and nurturing for family and children. They use this idea of maternalism, which in many cases had kept them in the private. You're supposed to be a mother, a daughter, a wife, a domestic, a housekeeper, a child care. You're really supposed to take care of your family. Well, women turn this around on society and they say they take these ideas of maternalism and they use that to actually go out in the public and say, well, I can be, the way I take care of my children, I can go be a nurse. The way I teach my kids, then I can go out and be a teacher. So they use maternalism, which often for most of history has relegated them to the private home sphere to actually go out in the public. It's pretty smart doing it. It gives them a wider role in the public. They mostly focus when they do go out. They mostly focus on women and children, working class women and children, trying to make the lives of poor women and children better. National Child Labor Committee, founded in 1907, hired Lewis Hine. I think we looked at a photo of him before. Lewis Hine to photograph conditions in mines and mills. We have a photo right here of a little girl working in probably a textile mill. Little girls would be brought into these mills to work in these terrible conditions. If a machine would break down or something, they would have the little children actually crawl into it. If they could fix a small part, fix a bolt, fix a screw, something simple, they could actually have them crawl into the machine without having to tear the whole machine apart to fix some sort of internal component. It was not uncommon for children to get hurt, mutilated, killed, seriously injured in these machines. It wasn't uncommon at all. So Lewis Hine goes out and photographs all these conditions. And then the idea is to show these photos to the middle class and then have them change the laws, change politics. Uh, that one was mostly focusing on child labor and trying to fix the issue of child labor in America. These groups, and this is just one group, these groups and these women, by the way, these women are typically middle class women. The poor women don't have time to be messing with this stuff. They're having to work, take care of their families. They're the ones working in the factories, and the rich don't really care most. So these middle class women, they really wanted to bring the idea of social injustices to the public, to let people understand how bad life was, how rough life was for immigrants, especially women and kids, to show how challenging their daily lives were. And it's not because they were lazy or unintelligent. It's just because the industrial marketplace, because the industrialization of America, These people worked hard. They worked long hours. They typically worked much more hours than a middle class person. So it wasn't they were lazy or unintelligent. They just didn't have access to education. They didn't have access to social services. They didn't have access to better jobs. They simply had to take what they got. Um, the middle and upper class would often commonly say, the poor are that way because they're supposed to be, because they're simply poor, they're uneducated, they're slovenly. Not at all true. But yet this was a common argument used by the upper classes, middle and upper classes, to justify their status and their wealth versus the poverty of everyone else. Josephine Lowell formed the New York Consumers League, 1890. New York Consumers League was focused on women specifically, helping them with wages and working conditions, not just charity. Some of these organizations just were charity. They would give women a place to sleep, help them against domestic abuse, give them a place to run away, to protect themselves, take their kids away. So some were charity, but places like the New York Consumer League was about helping women, not helping them learn things, helping them get training, helping them get better job working conditions, not just giving handouts. We do see the first minimum wage laws, for instance, first public assistance law and first minimum wage law, both come about in Massachusetts in 1912. 1912, first public assistance law, first minimum wage law in Massachusetts, 1912. So they make some effects. They have some changes. Do they really change anything at the federal level? Not really. But they do get some state laws changed, especially in the North, New England area. Someone actually worried that there were drawbacks to this. The drawback goes like this. If everyone was so focused on women's concerns and so focused on the idea of maternalism, the fact that women were good mothers and good caregivers, which then they could go out and be teachers or nurses, they actually worried that they would be treated as equal citizens. Because if you're all focused on this idea of maternalism, what if she wants to be a police officer? What if she wants to be a business person? What if she wants to do any number of 1,000 other jobs, be a lawyer, be a doctor? That isn't necessarily maternalistic. So it's like you're opening the door from the private to the public, but then you built this really narrow road, and the women have to walk this narrow path, and they can't diverge off of it. So they actually figure that in some ways this is actually legalized discrimination. You're giving them access to the public, but if there's 100 different things they could do, you're telling them they can do one or two. The other 98 are off limits. So in some ways they thought this was, some people criticize this, thinking this might have actually not been good. Women should be able to access anything, not just access these couple of avenues. So yeah, even though these laws, many cases were benefiting women and children, many of these rules and policies and changes were benefiting women and children, working women, giving them more opportunities. Some also believed it was almost the creation of another sphere, a third sphere, a separate woman sphere, not private, not public, but this little separate category that only women can be in. And therefore women must always be in this category. Um, there was concerns about that. What about African Americans in this time period? African Americans had to deal with constant discrimination and racism, especially the South was really bad, especially in the South, although it was coast to coast. Once you got outside of what had been, once you got outside of what had been the slave states, life was better. But even from New York to Los Angeles and everywhere in between, racism and segregation and prejudice were still pretty common. We do see African Americans becoming more vocal, though. We do, especially under Roosevelt. We see a real increase in openness under Roosevelt, under Teddy. He was in office basically 8 years, and he was seen as friendly to black people. Don't get me wrong, he never really came out as pro-black or started making laws and policies helping African Americans. But he was seen to at least be sort of friendly to African Americans. In a time period when the Democrats appeared to hate black people and wanted nothing to do with black people and were doing everything they could to shut black people out of politics, some Republicans were opening their arms to blacks. Opportunists. If Democrats are going to push black people away, the Republicans start to grab onto him. And so we do see an increasing interest here in the Republican Party for a few years. Ever since Lincoln, African Americans have been more Republican leaning. Uh, but we see an increase here in this time period. Um, as black people lean towards populism, and when populism sort of falls apart, many of them lean back into the Republican Party. W. Du Bois was Harvard educated. He advocated higher education. He advocated the idea of the talented 10th. This, in essence, was the idea that the top 10% of blacks, the best, should step up and lead the rest of the African American community. Further, the other 90% should focus all their efforts on helping and assisting the top 10% become leaders and successful. Why? Why should the rest of us prop up them? The point being, they will then move up into the upper echelon of society. They will move up into the halls of power, money and power and politics, and they will be the ones to change the laws for the other 90%. So you push the top 10% to the top in your communities, give them every opportunity, sacrifice for them, and then they will have the responsibility of making the society better for everyone else, all the other blacks. Great idea. Not sure it ever manifested like Du Bois wanted. Not sure it ever really did. I've not necessarily ever seen evidence that this became. It was inspirational for some, certainly inspirational for some. And we'll see. Well, we'll see a little bit of this that we see might come out of uh, that might pop up in the civil rights chapter. A little bit of how some of the civil rights leaders were inspired by Du Bois's ideas, but I don't know. There was really some significant things that did come out of it, especially one, which I'll get to in a second. Well, in 1905, the Niagara Movement is formed, and this is a system full of African American civil rights leaders that really pushed for lots of changes in the black community. Now, let's make this clear. This is changes that the white authority in America, and Congress in Washington was almost entirely white male, so that the white majority, in essence, it was to get the white majority to change laws and policies to benefit the poor blacks and just blacks in general. African Americans wanted better voting rights, better voting opportunity, criminal justice reform, better opportunities in criminal justice, more jobs available to them, better health care, more health care options. They wanted better treat in the military. Military was segregated. That doesn't change until 47 or 1947. So military segregated. And they also want more opportunities in education. More schools that accept black people, more black schools if that's what's necessary, but more opportunities across the board. Voting, ending segregation, equality and justice, opportunity in jobs, healthcare, military, education, all that. They wanted all these things that would all improve the lives of African Americans. In general, it would improve the lives of any poor people. Of any poor, regular, working class Americans, this would help all of them. Well, they advocate for this and have very limited success. Very limited. Maybe the most significant thing to come out of the entire civil rights movement of the early 1900s is this organization. In 1909, out of the Niagara Movement is formed a new organization, NAACP, National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. It advocates for nothing short of black equality. It's really very straightforward. In essence, blacks need to have all the rights and all the opportunities that whites do. Simple. Black and white in America should be the same. Same opportunity to jobs, same pay, same opportunities to education, housing, equal completely. And on pretty much every single category. I can't think of any category that doesn't apply. Blacks were not equal in any way in every category. Now, blacks weren't unique in this. This also applied to Mexicans, but at this point in time, almost all Latinos are Mexican in America, Mexican or Puerto Rican. So it applied to Mexicans, Puerto Ricans. It applied to Asian Americans, Mexican Americans. It applied to Japanese Americans, Chinese Americans. Honestly, if you weren't white or Protestant, you were discriminated and treated as second class status. Um, there was no equality in this country if you weren't white, male, Protestant. There simply wasn't. I mean, you can find individual cases where a black person might have a good job or a woman might have a good job. But those are really the exceptions. 95% of the time, if you weren't white male, you were at a disadvantage in almost every category. Just the truth. And also bear in mind that doesn't mean like white males had it all great either. That's probably what makes it even worse. Many poor white men had really bad lives too. They were lacking the necessities of life. So if you figure many poor white guys and poor white families did not have the necessities, imagine how bad had to be for the minorities who were treated even less and were given even fewer opportunities. This gives you an idea of how politics changed in this time period. Politics really changes during the progressive era to be more of a one-on-one personal politics. It would have been very common before the 1880s, 1890s for you as a regular person to never even have a chance to see a president up close. Not even a chance. Even if you went to Washington, you would never get close or see a president up close. Just didn't happen. Teddy Roosevelt really changes that. Teddy Roosevelt goes out and shakes hands with people all across this country, across all from coast to coast. Teddy really changes the whole face of how politics works. And this is La Follette. He's running for office. You can look in your book. I think this is like in Minnesota or something. Now he's running for a local office, local state office, but it gives you the idea what politics is now. Politics is more of a personal thing. During the progressive era, politics becomes personal. People, this way, I guess the way to look at it, government was always seen as this high, lofty thing that had nothing to do with us, that just dealt with all the big stuff. But on a daily basis, we had no actual interaction with government. During the progressive era, many people start to see much more interactions with government, and they actually start to see government can do things to make their lives better. That was the progressivism. The government and people are starting to take a more progressive role in reforming and changing the laws to actually benefit the people, benefit the working class, the majority of Americans. We have a saying today in politics, and I don't know when this began, but this would be the time period when this might have begun. It would make sense. All politics is local. It's that simple. 4 words. All politics is local. Meaning, no matter what is happening, and no matter how high up the ladder, all the way up to Washington, what you really care about is how whatever the hell they're doing thousands of miles away is going to affect you right here in your living room, in your house, in your town, at your job, at your school, with your family. All politics is local. No matter what's happening and where it's happening, what do you care about? Is how it affects you personally and your family and your circle of people. It really begins in the progressive era. People really start to see that politics is not just some far off, aloof thing in Washington. It actually can affect their daily life every single day, their jobs, their work, their education, their home life. And that's really how this idea of progressive grassroots politics really changes America. And it's been really this way ever since. It really starts here in the early 1900s. It is increased a little bit under Wilson, and then Teddy Roosevelt, 1930s. He really takes all this that has happened before and he fashions an entirely new political system in America. Our political system in America before FDR, and I don't know what FDR is what I meant. I'm not sure what I said. FDR in the 1930s is what I meant. Before FDR and after FDR, you can really almost create you can almost make two types of politics in America. Before FDR and after FDR, everything changed. But it really starts here. It really starts with the first Roosevelt, this one right here. And this is La Follette, and this really exemplifies this. Everybody cares. Everybody wants to know personally what you're doing. They actually come out to meet the guy one on one, and they want to hear what is happening. And all politics is local. It's really interesting how things change. All right, I think this is the last thing we're going to talk about. Yeah, basically this is the last section. C here, and then section D. So yeah, this is going to be looks like it's going to be a shorter chapter. All right, so Teddy was president from 1901 to 1909. Now we're flipping to 1912. What happened in the intervening 4 years? Well, Taft, a Republican, comes in and wins the presidency in 08. Teddy retires. He was so popular. If Teddy Roosevelt had run in 1908, he would have probably won. He was popular. He chose not to. He just chose to walk away. He believes he had done his business. He had made his impact. He was done with politics. He walks away for about 2 years and then changes his mind. Unfortunately, it was too late. All right, so let's talk about this 1912 election, which is one of the most important elections in American history because it really changes the direction of how our American political system sort of changes how things work. Um, Big change in 1912, and then of course the large change is 1932, really when everything really shifts. But it really, these two men, Wilson and Roosevelt, really make a big difference. So Taft won in 1908. Taft had 4 years. Teddy Roosevelt walks away for a couple years. He comes back in 1910 and decides he wants to get back in politics. His focus, though, now is entirely on social justice and welfare. He's entirely a progressive president. Probably at the time would have been considered socialist. Um, yeah, he was. He really changed. He had been moving this way during his whole presidency, but we believe he was held back due to his political affiliation with the Republicans. We think really that much of what held him back from really becoming very progressive and very reform minded was his, Republican affiliation and the Republican Party holding him back. Well, he hopes to get the Republican nomination in 1910. He starts talking about the Republican nomination for the 12 election. That's, of course, no, that's not going to happen. They already had a president, they had Taft. So there was the Republican Party going to drop a trustworthy president that sort of followed their ideology for the other guy who had been a Republican, he was actually still, who was incredibly progressive and dangerous and scary. And we didn't know what his policies were going to be like. No, you're not going to drop an incumbent to go back to Teddy Roosevelt. So they say no to Teddy. No interest in that. He advocated women's rights. He advocated for child labor laws, ending all child labor. He also talked about minimum wage laws. He wanted to restrict the efforts of the courts to basically, he wanted to find ways to stop the courts from blocking reform efforts and social welfare efforts. I mean, wow. The kind of stuff he did was unheard of in this time period. We really don't see this again. Even Wilson doesn't do a lot of this stuff. Wilson picks up a little bit of this, but a lot of what Teddy is talking about, we really don't see until his cousin comes along in 1930s. Incredibly progressive. Too much for the time period, unfortunately. Most people, this was, yeah, it was simply too much. The Republicans say no, we're not going to have it, we're not going to do it. You go away. So he forms his own party. Let me tell you, the worst thing to happen to either of the major political parties is when someone goes off and forms a third party, and they're popular. Teddy forms a third party known as the Bull Moose Party, the Progressive Party. For name for him, he was referred to as a bull moose because that's the kind of guy he was. He walked into a room, he took over the room. He was like that bull in a china shop. He had all the power, the authority. Anyone got in his way, he just run over him. He was, metaphorically, he was an aggressive guy, boisterous, loud, and strong-willed. And yeah, um, he had a big following. He gets millions of votes. He runs in the election. I mean, he gets millions of votes. He's popular. Um, he is. He runs on his policy called New Nationalism. That's what he calls it, New Nationalism. He is there for the nation. It's very simple. It's not. It's not probably what we would think of as nationalism today. That really develops in the mid 20th century. The idea of nationalism. This is simply the idea that he is there for the nation. He's going to take care of the whole nation, all the people. Um, yeah, he was running as a man of the people. He was disappointed the Republicans say no. The Republicans choose Taft, which of course makes sense. He was already their president. Why would you choose someone else when you already have a person as a president from your party? So of course they chose Taft. Doesn't make any sense that they would do differently. Um, he leads the Bull Moose Progressive Party. Well, what about the third person? There's actually four people. There's actually a fourth party. Eugene Debs runs as a socialist, I think, and he actually gets like 1 million votes or something. He's popular. It really shows how popular socialism was in this period. It's not surprising if you actually think about it. Uh, Socialism and the ideas of communism actually become very popular in America in the teens and 20s. Even to the point that we have a communist party in America by the 20s, a socialist party in America. These ideas of socialism were often a response to industrialization. Industrialization abused all the workers. Socialism touted itself as taking care of all the workers. So it's sort of a natural response to the industrialization of the world, is socialism. The industrial world tears down workers and treats them like cogs and machines and almost worthless, interchangeable. And socialism was all about trying to help the workers. So yeah, it's not surprising it was so popular at the turn of the century and within that time period. Wilson is chosen by the Democrats. He is a Southern Democrat, but he's also an intellectual. He was a university president, I think, Princeton. He was a president of Princeton at one point. He was a political scientist, a professor. That's what he was. He was a total intellectual. Not your typical Democrat, but that's who they chose. He advocated reforms. He did advocate some of the stuff, but not nearly as dramatic or radical as Roosevelt. Certainly not. He didn't want to change everything, but he did want to change some of the stuff. He did want to change some stuff to do. He did talk about minimum wage. He talked about ending child labor. He talked about women's equality. Truthfully, he talked about many of the things Roosevelt talked about, just not quite as strongly or as radically. He talked about a way to cross the aisle, as we call it, to get the Republicans, Democrats to work together. Um, Pardon me. He called it the New Freedom. By the way, from now on, from the 1900s on, almost every election, the political candidates choose some type of slogan like this. I don't know. Yeah, he advocates reform while keeping liberty intact. The idea of political economic liberty intact. Tough line to walk. That's what he advocated. He believed capitalism was important. You must have capitalism and you must have elite power. You must have elite power. Ultimately, he was really the Wilson of 1912 was very much like the Roosevelt of 1901. Really. Only instead of Republican, he was Democrat. Balanced business and labor interests. I'm not saying they're identical and cookie cutter, but very much the stuff that Wilson really talked about doing, walking the line and balancing the needs of the working class and the big business interests, is exactly what Roosevelt talked about in 1901. Roosevelt's argument in 1912 was that was last decade. Now it's actually time to move further. Roosevelt, in essence, saying at some of the political speeches, "I've already done that. That's what I did 10 years ago. It's now time to move forward and do more." Um, Wilson was popular. He wins. I mean, Wilson becomes president. But the only reason Wilson wins is because of the split election. Most likely, had Teddy not entered the election, Taft would have won. Most likely. Wilson wins against an incumbent president. That is very unusual. Only a couple times in our history, 250 years, has a sitting president who ran for re-election not won. Almost always they win. Had this not been a three-way split, technically it was four with Eugene Debs, but it was mainly three. Had it not been a three-way split, almost assuredly Taft would have won this election and Wilson would have lost. But the problem is Roosevelt comes in, who had been Republican. He splits a lot of Republican votes. And because all it matters in politics for president is the plurality. In other words, who gets the most. I mean, you could technically have a four-way split and have someone win president with only like 30% of the vote. That could happen. It hasn't, but it could. You could have someone become president that only one out of, or only 3 out of 10 Americans voted for. The vast majority of Americans vote for other people, and you can have that person win. All it matters is whoever gets the most out of all whoever's put together. So Wilson wins, but what did he get? 42%. 42%. So I mean, this could have been different. I mean, Roosevelt could have got 33, 34, and Taft could have got 30, and Wilson could have got 35%. He would have still won. All it matters is who gets the most votes on a per state basis. And whoever gets the most votes in state X wins state X. And you win enough state X's, you become president. Wilson won. So yeah, had Roosevelt not been in there, you would have very possibly seen a lot of those votes for Roosevelt going to Taft, and you put Roosevelt and Taft together, and that's 50%. Look at Debs. Debs got 1 million votes. 6% of the vote went to this guy, who's a socialist. Even I don't know if this is the election, but one time Debs ran for president like 6 times. One time he ran from prison. He was actually in prison for being a radical, some type of radical stuff he did, and they put him locked him up for it, and he ran for president. I guess there wasn't any law against it, I suppose. Well, the New Rider, I think it's what it's called. Yeah, the New Rider. Wilson, the New Rider, onto the White House. Harper's Weekly, June 1912. This is when he's running for election. Here we have Roosevelt. Pardon me. I don't know what I said. This is Wilson. Wilson here. He's in the robes of the University of Academia. He's got the university hat on. He's on the donkey, of course. The donkey represents Democratic Party. Yes. And we have the VP here. I don't know who the VP is. I have his name here, actually, I think. I don't even know who he is. He didn't go on to any notoriety. Thomas Marshall, Thomas R. Marshall. Not to me, anyway. So I can't think of who he is in particular off the top of my head. So Thomas R. Marshall's the VP, and it just shows he's the new guy. He's inexperienced. He has no political experience. He turned out to be a really good president. He got us through World War One. He actually turned to be an effective, capable president. He served 8 years. Reelected, pretty strong win in 1916. So yeah. So let's talk about his presidency. Wilson and the New Freedom. Wilson came into office as a middle-of-the-road reformer, sort of like Teddy did. By the end of his presidency, again, sort of like Teddy, he'd become a full-fledged reform progressive president. Again, he's the one who got the Women's Voting Right Act passed. He's the one that got the 19th Amendment passed at the end of his presidency. He's the reason women got the right to vote in this time period. So he became very progressive. He started off middle of the road, and by the end of his presidency, he was a progressive. Hell, he was a socialist, probably. He was our first president to truly advocate medicine for all, healthcare for all, that all people should have a right and access to healthcare. Took us 100 years to get there, and I don't know if we're going the wrong other direction now, it seems, but it took 100 years to get there. But this becomes a standard of the Democratic Party after Wilson, the idea of healthcare, national healthcare. So his ideas change. By the end of his presidency, he believes fully that the working class needs to be protected and taken care of, and that the working class is being destroyed by industrial America. He really comes to believe that all this power and wealth and credit and money in the hands of the rich and powerful are destroying our country. And he really believes, it says over here, that our industrial nation is controlled by a system of credit. All our activities are in the hands of a small group of men who chill and check true economic freedom. We've come to one of the worst ruled, completely controlled, dominated governments in the world. No longer a government of the majority, but a government of the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men. Oh my God. That is, oh wow, that's a terrible, drastic, draconian statement to say against big business and American industrialism. And it's entirely true. 100%. America came to be dominated entirely by big business interests, big money interests, and powerful corporations and industrial powers. Our society was being run by a small group of elite, rich, powerful industrialists. and bankers. I guess industrialists, but also financial bankers and whatnot. And he believed that the working class people were simply being destroyed by this, being run into the ground by so much power and wealth at the top. He was right. Barry Butch became anti-business, anti-industrialization by the end of his presidency. He passes. Let's see what else we got going on here. He did not like the corporate interests. He thought the workers and women and children were victims of this industrial America. He struggled with civil rights issues. He was a Southern Democrat. He never really did anything to address issues of civil rights and inequality. Didn't ever really do anything to deal with any issues of black rights. He never passes an anti-lynching law. He doesn't ever really make any laws that directly assist African Americans or minorities. However, he does get a lot of things into law, gets a lot of things signed into law that help the working class. And since almost all minorities are part of the working class, indirectly, he actually does quite a bit to help working class minorities, Latinos, blacks, immigrants, Asian Americans, actually quite a lot. Just doesn't do it directly because he can't directly go out and claim to be an open advocate of blacks. Because at the end of the day, he still wanted to get reelected. He still wanted to be reelected president in 1916, and to go out and totally advocate for blacks and advocate for African Americans would have probably doomed his election in 1916. He would have probably lost. Um, there's a thing we say today in politics. There's something called a third rail of politics, and that's a term that can refer to lots of different things. But the third rail on a like a subway line, I guess it's a subway line. You have the two rails that the train runs on. The third rail is the powered rail. It's where all the power is. It's where the energy is. If you were to touch the third rail, you're dead instantly. It fries you completely. You're, you're baked literally. So the third rail is instant death. So the third rail of politics in this time period was African American equality or African American rights. Anyone who advocated for that, you ended your political career. You were done. You would never get any type of significant office again. You might get elected to a small town that was mostly black, but other than that, you would not have any political opportunities in the broader scope of America if you advocated for black equality or black rights. I'm not saying it right or excuses it. I'm simply saying the atmosphere of America at the time would have meant had he advocated for black rights, he would have not been reelected. And he knew this. It would have applied to anybody of any party. Just didn't happen in this time period. We're not ready for that as a country yet. It's another generation before people even really start talking about that stuff. He creates an income and inheritance tax law in 1913, passes the federal tax inheritance law. It only affects about 5% of Americans. However, it almost entirely focuses on the rich because poor people don't have inheritances. So, income and the inheritance laws almost entirely focus on the rich and on businesses, which generate massive amounts of revenue. He targets the elite. This became the number one source of revenue for almost the entire decade of the 19 teens. Almost the whole decade, this becomes the number one source of revenue. This 5%, affecting 5% of the population, pretty much funded the government for several years. Hugely significant because, of course, what happens a couple years after this? World War I. And we need tons of money to fight a world war. So the rich, the wealthy, big businesses, they did give back in the 19 teens. They were forced to, and they helped America and they helped fund the war, actually. Many smaller taxes go away, and we see the rich poor gap again get better. It got better under Teddy, and we see it get better here again. So the rich poor gap continues to shrink a little under Wilson, taking away some power and wealth from the rich and giving it to the poor. Robin Hoodish, if you will. He also creates the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission. I think this is still in existence, actually. It investigates companies, and it also allows the FTC, which is really important, to determine what's unfair and to actually determine how to deal with businesses. They can actually fine businesses. They can shut businesses down. They can take away factories from employers that are treating workers unfairly. And this is really one of the first not a branch of government, one of the first government offices to really start putting the blame for much of the worker problems on the business and the employer, not the workers. To start to really talk about so many of the problems in the workplace aren't caused by the workers. It's caused by the unfair working environment and the treatment of the workers. It was very flexible, very broad. We also see the Committee of Industrial Relations really focusing on labor and violence. They also focus on the violence in the workplace. They really start to say the violence in the workplace is not a response. It's not the workers' fault. It's simply the workers who are desperate, trying to take care of their families, trying to provide for each other and provide for their way of life. It's the employer's fault for making life so bad, for making life so challenging. So the Commission of Industrial Relations investigates labor practices, violence in the workplace. They blame anti-unionism on a lot of the problems. In other words, the employers and the big businesses attacking the unions and going after the workers for joining unions, even though workers are joining unions to simply be treated fairly and have fair opportunities. We really start to see some changes in this period under Wilson. Really, we do. We also get the actual official first federal 8-hour workday law. Great. It's good for the precedent it sets. It's not really good because it doesn't affect most workers. It's only for railroad workers. Railroad workers who often thought were to be one of the most dangerous professions in America, while simultaneously one of the most important. Because they're the one that transported all the people and goods across our country. They were sort of the arteries and veins of our industrialization. So we get this: 8 hours labor, 8 hours recreation, 8 hours of rest down there in the corner. But it's hugely influential because this sets the stage for an actual nationwide 8-hour idea of an 8-hour workday law, which does come about in another 20 some years. This idea of a workday should be just 8 hours. It starts really here. Wilson provides over the largest single increase in federal government power until the 1930s, greater than any other president. Largest increase in federal power, federal employment, federal expenditures. Make sure you understand a lot of this stuff comes with expenditures. Now, also bear in mind, this includes the war. So if you were to factor World War I out of this, he may not have had this largest increase in federal power and authority. Because we see a big jump up under Wilson in the first couple of years, and then when we hit the war, we see another massive climb in federal power and spending and employment. Obviously because of World War I, which we move into and start into in 1917. So huge expansion of federal power that happens under Wilson. See McKinley here, a little bit increased, kind of flat. Roosevelt, significant. Roosevelt in his 8 years, really significant. Huge. We see Taft here, a spike here, an increase. Wilson, not this huge, not that big of an increase, but it only goes up to 1916-ish. He's president until technically 21, right? He's technically president until March or January of, I guess it's March, March of 21. So he's still got a bunch more years ahead of him. This line goes straight up. If you actually look at this chart and extend it to the 20s, this just goes straight up. But that's primarily due to the war. The federal government, of course, massively ramps up for the war effort. All right, well, that is the chapter. Done a little bit quicker on this chapter. And thank you very much. And we will end it there. Take care.